Okay, we are going to get started. Just wanted to confirm that everything is working. So I'm going to go ahead as we get started here for today's final presentation for Neon 1 of 2024. My name's Tim Sarrantonio. I'm Director of Corporate Brand. We have a lot of interest in today, so we're going to get started in about a minute or so. Let me make sure. Okay. There is that and that. Okay. Hello, Bart. So, I just wanted to make sure that we're also testing out as people come in. Um, this is an interactive session too. I got a really good presentation that is ready for us to go. But I also want to make it that we can ask questions and things of that nature. So uh, I'll explain how that's going to work, but let's test out that you can do that. Bart's already got the chat going, for instance. So if you want to put into the chat who you are and where you're calling in from, it is a hotline. Um, that would be good. So okay, so we're gonna get into what we're gonna be able to talk about today. Things like that. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Jackie. I'll get into Carolyn's question too. So this is one of the other things, and we're already starting to get used to it. So when you have a dedicated question that you'd like me to see, like Carolyn's, then use the Q&A. If it's more like, hey, I just want to throw a comment out there, or I have an idea or something like that, that's great. Please use the chat too. I'll try to pay attention to both of them. I'm pretty adaptable on that. But we're going to try to keep this interactive and engaging and very, very useful as well. So let me go ahead and just make sure I could see all the chat. Hello, Judy. Good to see you, Judy. So let's go ahead and get started. We got a lot to cover in the next 58 minutes. And so I'm going to get into first, who is this guy? You know, I'm wearing a goofy hat and stuff like that. Happy holidays, everyone. I know it's December 19th. We are almost to the end of the year. The biggest giving days of the year are coming in our sector. And I want to tell you a little bit about me before we get into it. So my name's Tim Sarrantonio. I'm director of corporate brand at Neon One. I've actually been with the company for over 13 years at this point, but I started my career in the nonprofit space in 2008 formally as a grant writer in the South Side of Chicago. I worked for various community-driven organizations. I've used different databases of all different types and sizes. I'm an internationally renowned speaker, I guess, according to other people. But most importantly, I am also a father and husband to some French Canadians. I see we have several folks from Canada as well. Actually, we just started partnering with the Association of Fundraising Professionals in Toronto. So very, very cool. Bonjour. And very applicable to today, and I'd love to see this in the chat if you folks know about this. I am chair of the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. Would love to hear in the chat. Do you know what that is? Are you aware of what that is? And I just want to just see. Okay. Um, and so the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, if you are not Ruthie, is the largest analysis of donor data, individual giving data specifically in the world. This is a data collaborative that has both Neon One but other data providers. And we just released some data to help understand where we are in these larger trends that we're going to unpack today. And so, that is something that I'm very, very excited about. The report just released at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. I have insights from that in here. So, very cool. Thank you, Wendy. Very, very cool. So now all of you are a little bit aware, and so very, very excited to kind of get into how this is going to work today. So first, this is a bit of an ask me anything situation, especially if we want to use the Q&A. But we got to put some guardrails on it. You can ask me anything. Whether I answer it, we will see. What we're going to be drilling into is 5 trends that we've identified for organizations like yours to pay attention to heading into 2025, as well as some actionable elements on what to do about that. One of the things that I hate is going into these and there's no, it's very either very high level or it's a secret sales pitch. None of those things apply today. So, Carolyn, if you are interested in exploring Neon One, if you're not a client, that's something that we'd love to have. It's just that's not what I'm focusing on today. And especially for also folks who may need some support or stuff like that, what I'm going to do is pop especially if you want to learn more about how you can get comfortable with neon stuff. I'm going to put a um, nice thing in the chat here for some other types of options. But Carolyn, we are going to get into, I would say, things that touch on the question that you had, because really what we're seeing nonprofits struggle with that we'll get into is that generosity is everywhere. The data is actually going to show us that generosity, people are very, very generous. The difficulty is finding it, seeing it, and prioritizing it. So when we go through the trends, please continue to use the chat, but especially the Q&A if you want me to talk about something. I am going to pay attention as we go, but we'll also have some time at the end if I parking lot it. So for instance, for the question about neon stuff, I've parking lotted that and also provided a resource. Ideally, I'm going to be doing that in here. That gets into the final 2 things before we get into our 52 minutes of content, let's say. So it's being recorded. It will be available on the website tomorrow. You've registered, so you don't have to do anything. You will get an email, and the deck you are about to see will be provided in that. If anything, I might even upload that today, depending on the sick kid that I have. And no matter what, sit back, think. I want you to sit and give this space to actually think strategically. You can write notes. I want you to, though, give yourself the time to go, how can I think big picture? How can I do a little bit of cathedral thinking and think beyond the next 3 months, 6 months, etc.? So let's get into it. First is a vibe check. I'm going to actually launch a poll. How are we feeling about 2025? How are we getting into it? I put it there, so we're seeing some live results come in so far. Out of let's see, we got good amount of folks in the room today, and so about 50% participation. I'll probably cut this in about another 10 seconds just to make sure we get that representation. Again, we want to keep you engaged. We want to keep you doing. Don't worry. I actually got some fun little prize stuff for people who are registered for this too. So, okay, let's go ahead and add that poll. So generally people are feeling 4 out of 5 is the strongest one, but it's a nice spread. So only 7% of you right now feel like this is not great. We have a few of you that are feeling really peachy on the 5 side, but I would say, we're kind of in the middle. And I think that's kind of how a lot of people feel this year. So where I think it's helpful when I was doing my fundraising, when I've been working with nonprofits like you, is, and I'll go ahead and share those results real quick. Where folks like you are really kind of struggling is especially when it comes to the intersection of technology and generosity, and that's what we're going to get into today specifically. Generosity experience design is a way to strategically think about the role of technology in your work. So we're going to use this to help frame our conversation. Then what we're going to do is then if we have a base understanding of where technology sits, then we're going to transition into those trends because there's some really big things we have to discuss collectively, because every single one of you that's working in your job has an impact on every single other person who's in this call. Because overall, We need to stop thinking that our actions are only impacting our own immediate communities. There is a ripple effect of generosity. And that is because generosity is not just money. And so when we think about this through the lens of generosity experience design, it is simply helping us understand, okay, I have all this stuff. How do I tap into that generosity? I know people are generous, but where are they? How do I keep them around? That's what we're going to learn about today. First and foremost, generosity is time. Let's see. Let's actually use that chat. What are other things that we may think that are generosity? We know time is important. What else? Let's see it in the chat. How do we define generosity? Word of mouth, time, talent, treasure, compassion, talent. Oh, hi, Carrie. Expertise. Exactly. That's that talent, expertise. I just like my alliteration. And this is what I learned at Sacred Heart School. Time, talent, treasure. But notice that treasure visualizes also in-kind donations, especially if you're a food bank or if you're a Habitat for Humanity with a restore or all of these different things. Generosity is holistic. And we have to remember that every single one of these things has a data representation in something that you manage. Even if it's not electronic, you're keeping this somewhere. Now, what is the ultimate currency that we all operate in? What is the one thing that connects every single one of us? From a what is generosity standpoint. I want to see a guest. Remember, I'm being alliterative, so it will start with a T. Time, we got time already. Relationships. Okay, I'll skip. You know what? It's Thursday near the end of the year, folks. I'm going to skip to it. Teamwork. Trust. I would say, Madison, that you're on the right track there because ultimately, teamwork, trust, you have to trust somebody to be part of a team. And donors need to trust you. Volunteers, supporters, advocates need to trust you, and vice versa. Ultimately, what connects all of us is trust. And so when we look at the psychology of giving, according to the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy, things that help drive the inner behavior of donors, and that's ultimately what we're going to unpack here today, is what are they doing and how can you better understand that? When people give, it is not the same as buying something on Amazon. A lot of boxes going around right now, right? That's not the same as the work that you are doing. What makes people feel connected to you is that one, they trust you. You are competent. You are outlining that you are doing the things that you say, and you are telling that in a cohesive and clear story. Then you also don't want to make people feel guilty. We don't want sad music playing over a dog in a cage, right? There is retention impacts to making people feel guilty. You might get the money immediately, but that doesn't make people feel good long term. And that's where the last part is critical because I have a feeling that a lot of us are generally managing relationships in that one-to-one thing. We hear a lot about personalization, right? You have to personalize the donor journey. Here's the reality though. People don't want to be a just part of a database and say, "Oh, I gave this gift and that's the only reason." No, they want to be part of a movement, a community. How do you do things that make people feel, "Oh, people like me do things like this"? That's ultimately what you're trying to do. A very Seth Godin thing. People like me do things like this. That's your donor community. That's your community of generosity. So how do we tap into that? Well, the strongest way to tap into that, according to the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy, is identity. So situations. So, okay, I want you to, here's a very concrete way of what I mean by that. Check your emails that are queued up for December 30th, 31st, stuff like that. If you are talking about it's December 31st, time is running out to give, you are practicing situational giving. You are asking people to respond to a situation. Relationship-based giving is maybe the board of directors or the or somebody who works for the nonprofit, mid-level major gift cultivation, they reach out. But what happens if you leave? Will that person stay around? What makes them stay around is identity. And identity can be multi-layered. Look in the mirror. Are you a single dimensional person? Of course not. Neither are your supporters. Identity is fluid. Identity can have multiple layers to it. What you need to do is figure out the people who say, people like me give to nonprofits like you. What is that thread? It might not be the same for all the different parts of your community. But one, there's that underlying thing that drives everybody. And then you can start to create segments and archetypes and personas even around things like this. We're going to get into some concrete data that is going to be really exciting to validate that this is the way to go. It's not enough to say, you're a good person. Everybody thinks they're a good person, unless you're a psychopath. People generally have a core moral identity. What you need to do as an organization, as a fundraising leader, is to understand, where do I fit in their world? And this is how it works. This is where the generosity experience design thinking comes into play. A lot of times, if we go to Madison's point, teamwork. We don't treat technology like it's part of the team. Think about how you approach even stuff like, I'm going to run reports, I'm going to provide this information. Could you tighten that up? When you create something like an end of the year appeal, you put it on your nice envelopes, right? This stuff like that. What you're doing, because that's a form of technology. A lot of times we also think like technology's everything is digital. No, like all of these things come together. If I send a receipt to the printer, even if it's in my house, that's an element of the generosity experience, because if you put the wrong merge field in there, if you forget to sign it, if you, in turn, let's focus on the positive, if you insert a personal note, or if you can take a piece of data that says, these are all people who have adopted from our shelter or have given in-kind donations the past year, I'm going to reference that. That amplifies identity. The generosity experience is the zone of trust. Technology can be a catalyst or it can hurt you. If you make it part of the team that is bringing you together with these folks, it can be transformative. So how do we do that? Well, first and foremost, unfortunately, most of our technology is designed like this. It's an inherent scarcity mindset. It says there's only a finite amount of resources, and we have to fight everything and everybody for it. This isn't how donors even think. The typical donor, and this is both things like Giving Day research. We've been doing Giving Days for years, and we find that people are contributing to multiple nonprofits on something like Give NOLA Day. But in turn, Bank of America has also found that the typical high net worth individual is contributing to at least 3, 5, up to 7 different nonprofits per year. Don't make decisions for your donors, because this is actually how the generosity experience works. It is an ecosystem. You are building an ecosystem, and your technology is just there to help capture, see, identify, and guide you. It is not the solution to your problems, but when you tap in and you have that cohesive connection between those things, as we'll explore, it can really do some magic. Now, people manage this in different ways, and this gets to Carolyn's question earlier today, because Neon One, again, we're not pitching anything here, but the way we think about this is this holistic. I'm going to go back here. This needs as much of one unified understanding as possible, and I'll show some examples of what happens when this is synced up. But you can manage the generosity experience in a lot of different ways, right? Like you have to just take into account how much work it's going to take to connect these things together, because you can have a bunch of different spreadsheets. You can have your shadow databases for your major gift officers where they manage everything in their email. You can have your databases and digital tools. You can have a donor management system, and then you got your event or auction system over here, and you have your email system over here and your website over there. The typical organization is managing things like that. But that as we'll learn, has drawbacks. And so the kind of the most sophisticated approach that has only been reserved historically for the 3% of nonprofits making over $5 million a year is an integrated, connected platform. So, go pay lots of money for something like Salesforce. You can get spreadsheets for sure. But at the end of the day, we need to think differently about all of this because we have to connect the supporters, the staff, and the technology. These are pictures from around my house, by the way. I took these earlier this year. I just wanted to put a chainsaw picture, in all honesty, into a deck. So we got about 40 minutes, right? So let's unpack those trends. Now, I actually am going to pause here, though. Do we have any questions? This is an Ask Me Anything. Is there anything that I can address so far before we shift into this? Because we're going to touch on the impact on how you might manage the generosity experience, because no matter what, all of you are doing it. It's just how mature you are at it. It's just how the level of not even sophistication. I think that the word sophistication can imply complexity. Things can be elegant in its simplicity. All right. Keep asking stuff if it comes up, but we got some really good things. Okay, we got a question, I think, perhaps. This call. Oh, Maggie, I know. Oh, my goodness. Just chasing. That's a term from Robert Weiner, which is an old school name. I don't know if anybody remembers Robert Weiner. This is 13 years of being in the tech sector talking. Okay, let's keep going. So where's the state of the sector? So you've seen the headlines. Nonprofit Pro, just for instance, put out a kind of a review of the Fundraising Effectiveness Project's Q3 results. I will be touching on some of that data in our presentation today. You are probably going to be literally the first people that have seen that information, because I don't think there's another webinar that's doing this. So awesome. But the headlines aren't great. A lot of it is dollars up, donors down. That's, I think, really kind of that consistent drumbeat, unfortunately, that we've been seeing here. And okay, Caitlin, good question. So we're going to touch on that in terms of how you can help teach teams and things like that to get them integrated, because some of this is very external. But once we shift into the back half of the presentation, Caitlin, I'm going to make sure that I answer your question. So I'm going to flag that as answer live. So the as we've mentioned, donor retention rates are struggling. Likely by when the Q4 report comes out next April. We tend to release that at the AFP conference, which will be in Seattle this year. And it will come out digitally too. You don't have to physically be there. What we've tended to see is that it comes in around 45%, 44%, give or take. But first donor retention, somebody who's given to your nonprofit for the first time this year, only 2 out of 10 people are likely to come back. And this leads to that second point. Trust is your currency. If people feel disconnected, or they just kind of don't care, or don't think there's a sense of need or a sense of positive impact, it can likely lead to them moving their philanthropic attention somewhere else. And I think that's the important thing to remember here. Generosity's not going down. It's traditional philanthropy that is struggling. And that leads to one of the biggest things that ties into Caitlin's question, which is, according to the SISR, which is the State of Social Retention survey, might have slightly gotten the name wrong, but it's run by actual individual fundraisers surveying people like you. 65% of nonprofit workers like you are unsure if they'll even continue in the sector heading into 2025. So generally, well, Rhonda, yeah, trust is all over the place, but and that's the thing. Like, you are operating in a larger world where people are just overall generally more skeptical. So if you understand that environment, how can you not only create something that is healthy for your supporters, but also a workplace that people want to be at for a long time to come? And I think that's where elements of understanding your technology's potential for time saving, in particular, legitimate automation of workflows, basically what post-it note can you take off your desk, is where we're going to touch on today. So let's get into those trends. So first, trend number one. Okay, we got about 35 minutes to unpack these and some actionable stuff. So I'm going to go that a little bit fast, but only because these kind of bleed into each other. So we've already talked about the importance of identity-centric engagement, and we're seeing more and more of this when it comes to what will retain donors. Because as of right now, I mentioned that 18%. Well, it's actually 13.8% as of the report that just came out today. That means barely two people, probably just one person who gave to you this year is coming back next year. And here's the other data point that has been a long-standing benchmark. To acquire $1 from any of those new folks, it's going to cost you $1.25. If you retain them, it's 20 cents. And that is why values-informed fundraising is going to be critical, because your supporters care deeply about the things that you do, but they don't necessarily care deeply about you. They care about a cause. So who is best filling that need in your community? Does that cost factor in labor? Caitlin, I want to go back to the tape. It's a little bit of an older study, but I believe Jim Greenfield did take that into account. If anything, because of labor costs, it's probably higher now. It's a little bit older. We need a new study for that. Maybe FEP can do that. So values-based fundraising is also critical here, but here's number two: integrating marketing and fundraising data, and not just I have email open rates go into my CRM. That's not good enough. You can't just take a MailChimp thing and dump it into an account. The typical organization is using 3 to 5 different data sources. And this is getting into the question that was asked earlier today about, should I try to put these different things together? On the surface, it might seem like you're saving money, but you are actually saving very little because of the labor time. The labor time to take these things and even say, okay, I'm using my fancy CRM that I bought, and this company also sells a peer-to-peer tool, or also sells something like separate email integration that I can use. Well, here's the problem with that, is that you have to relearn probably email in 3 to 5 different things. You might be sending emails and all of that stuff. A CRM can have email for receipts. Your auction platform or your events platform can have receipts, emails. None of this stuff may look the same. It may act differently. It may refer to people differently. And this is going to cost you, because if you get inaccurate data because of all of this stuff, per erroneous record, it typically costs you $100. This is a standard industry benchmark across all data analysis. And so we want to be able to focus on the hygiene of your data, and marketing and fundraising data is going to become increasingly critical for that. And this can be as simple as ensuring that, okay, when somebody's contact information comes in, we are managing the communication preferences in a cohesive spot, or I'm creating segmentations that are very easily managed whenever I'm doing a texting campaign, something like that. Not everything also has to be about money. You can queue people up and tell them what is happening. And this also helps to Caitlin's point, which is, if your technology is not cohesively understood on how all of these things work together, if, for instance, you do not have a standards of procedure document. How many of you have, for your database, a standards of procedure, policies and procedures manual? I am not talking about the guides that a company like mine proposes. I'm talking about, this is how we enter gifts for optimal stewardship. There you go, Caitlin. Caitlin, best practices for teaching a team about new tools or using existing tools that require behavior change is that. I would love, like Tim at Neon, you know what? I'm going to drop my LinkedIn too, because if you want to share this with me, and I'm not going to promise immediate ability to do feedback, but I honestly love looking at these. I also have, and can try to find, maybe on the fly, or if I have some downtime during Q&A. I have one. You know what? I'm going to attach it to the resources in this presentation. So I have a sample one. Yes, Katie, I will add it. I will add it. There you go. Okay. Has a little bit of neon stuff, but it is actually designed to be agnostic and easily changed for other things. Okay, 30 minutes left. On to trend 3. We're doing great. Yeah, I'll share it. I'll absolutely share it. But it means you gotta click the email tomorrow when it says here's the recording, because that's where I'm going to put it. All right, trend 3. I was a grant writer. That's how I got my start in the sector. And the reality is that especially given some of the things happening in politics and stuff like that, happening in just general grant funding in the economy, it's going to get a little bit harder for those big swings, right? Like I even saw a little fun thing on LinkedIn, somebody throwing a GIF of like that guy that has duct tape and he slaps it on a tub of water that the water's flying out, and it says like nonprofit professionals, and it's like grants, and it's like funding gap, right? That's gonna be hard to rely on, and we actually found that this is gonna get harder. I when I did a similar presentation for AFP Toronto, Canada Helps even had very similar numbers, by the way, for our Toronto and Canadian friends, very similar numbers to this. Generally, we're seeing an increase in requests for services from organizations like yours, but that the funding isn't filling that gap. And it is especially, got to call it out, it is especially dire and hard for Black-led nonprofits. Of all, according to, and I have a lot of citations. I put a lot of data out. I understand that. So the it's important to have citations for this stuff. So if you even go to Back Black Movement, they have a bunch of research that talks about this. Floyd Jones helped found it, fantastic organization. And so what when we think about our work, when we think about the larger world, we have to think collectively too, right? It's not just our work. It's also we had a workshop in Chicago, for instance, where somebody asked about this. What can we do? She was a Michigan nonprofit. She actually had won our Generosity Exchange giveaway, and we flew her in for this special workshop in Chicago. And this was her question, like, how do I get these types of grants? And you might want to consider partnering with other organizations. You could build a better, stronger, more cohesive narrative if you've aligned your work on that type of stuff. Takes more time, but potentially in the coming 18 months may be more of a likely way that you're going to get funding. But the other thing here, because this isn't like a grant strategy session, a lot of this is individual giving. Individual giving will become more important because of this. And specifically, I want to call out, and we're coming back to our fundraising effectiveness project data, mid-level giving, which we are defining in this case basically, it could be as low as $500, but typically talking about 1,000 to 5,000 is a pretty solid kind of number that we're talking about. Now, this is important because those folks, if we look at the 501 to 5,000 number, that represents 14.6% of all people in the fundraising effectiveness project data set. And again, it's the largest analysis of people who are giving. So we could confidently say 14.6 of people who give, they're giving around this. But the retention rate of these folks has actually dropped like 6.5%. It's getting harder and harder to keep this group of folks. And the reality is that people who give over 5,000 or under $5,000, they represent around 76% of all people, but they don't represent the money. It's an inverse. And so what we need to start doing is not only maybe automating some of those smaller gifts, and we're going to touch on that strategically through things like recurring giving, but mid-level giving is then saying, okay, Caitlin's team has got her SOP lined up. Major gifts is handled by this core group of people. How can the team focus on cultivating things with this group? So how can you do that? Building events out as a community builder. Don't rethink the gala. The gala costs you too much money. It costs you, according to some industry research benchmarks on event fundraising, 50 cents for every dollar raised. Yet, if you acquire a recurring donor, those folks, according to Next After, have a 42% higher lifetime financial return compared to those coming solely from events. What I did with a local nonprofit, I even had a coaching call with them earlier today. Creators, you saw me put community creators in my identity slide if you were paying attention. That's me. I'm a community creator with Create Community Studios. They use our websites all the way to email and all this different stuff. And so it's very easy to log in and sign up for stuff. They have a new ceramic studio. But I became a recurring donor at a launch event. They had a nice community event. It still acted as a bit of a gala, but we were kind of encouraged to sign up for recurring gifts if we didn't want to do the big paddle raise. You can do it that way. And the reality is that recurring givers, according to our research, and if you who's read Neon One's recurring giving research? Who's read this report or the Giving Tuesday and end of the year version? You. Well, awesome, Katie. And great report. Thank you. And we're working on our next one. But the reality is that and we can include that type of information and that type of stuff. But recurring givers, when we started doing this analysis, the average was just shy of this number. It's definitely within this group. Recurring givers are solidly mid-level giving. Actually comes out, according to the average, just shy of $1,000 a year. What happens if you can get that from 10 people, 20 people, 100 people? We have a new story out. Fantastic organization who actually read our report and then turned that into an awesome program through things like this. So what can you actually do with this information? I want to share, just like I just shared, the organization. Let me try to quickly go grab them from a story standpoint because it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool. Progress. Yeah, here we go. So I'm going to drop this in the chat. Here's a new organization. It's actually in Canada because we're very fancily, very big time Canadian ready. So what can you do with this? First, we're going to tackle a big problem that a lot of you might be struggling with too, which is I'm talking all about community, but like, what about people with money? How do we manage this? How do I focus and prioritize $25 gifts when I might be talking to somebody who can give me a $50,000 transformative gift? How do you balance this? You don't have to. You can build a community of generosity that goes beyond your board members asking, how can I get in front of Melinda Gates or Mackenzie Scott or Bill Gates or Oprah or anything like that? And the reality is that look around your own community. There's people who don't have kids, right? They're single or they're married and they don't have any children and they love their pets. Like that's some decent money there. Possibly. Minority and women business owners, there is assets and capital investiture in there. LGBTQ families, younger supporters, all of the different things. Remember, go back to identity, looking around the world, those are opportunities for you. Maggie, oh boy, woof. And here's the reality. Let's talk about affluence data. What do I mean by affluence data? This is things like wealth screening or wealth screening, as my typo shows. So pros and cons, because sometimes this could be a little creepy. So just keep this in mind. But, platforms like Neon, we have some partnerships with a company like Windfall where it will say, okay, we think that this person's net worth is this. But there's also public data. There's peer information, oh, this person, they just sold their company, that type of stuff. Just pay attention to these types of things. It's where the notes actually matter in your CRM. But you can't build a strategy just around that. Affinity is much stronger. Much stronger. And this is showing engagement with your staff. This is engagement with things like this is why. Why do you connect your email and your database, for instance, or why do I track texting, or why do I track events, or peer to peer, or volunteerism into something that overall manages my relationships? It's because you want to build affinity. It's not to manage the money. If you think you've bought a database to manage the money, you are thinking about it wrong. And so affinity is your ultimate goal. And you can do this manually. If you don't have a database, you can do this type of thing. And generally, you can start to track this and say, okay, what is affinity to us? What shows that people care about our work? It could be as simple as you download the thing outside of it, or you add it as a custom field in your database. You could do your own proprietary scoring system. Most databases are prioritizing affluent scoring, but affinity scoring is the future. It's also one of the reasons, and this is about the only product flash. The generosity indicator of Neon is powered by 31 million donor records. It is looking across different giving across different organizations and saying, you know what, this person gives to similar nonprofits as you. It has a limit. It'll be like a 2 if they've given to somebody. Let's say you got the farmers market list came in, and then this person came in for the first time. You can look at them and go, oh, they're 2. That's indicating that they have similar support. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not an either or. It's not an either or. So I have 3 proposed solutions to help navigate this as you head into 2025, because ultimately we are trying to think about how do we build a community of generosity, not how do I build a profit and loss statement that's in the black. That's your finance team. That's an important thing. That's getting to the question, how do I get alignment? You have to have the heart things, the impressions, the brand people, right? Like, we're exhausting. We want to talk about our feelings too much. Finance just wants to know if the books are balanced. How do you balance that? So first, it's priorities. And so you don't want to go chasing dollars for people who don't care about you. And so this is one of those where the deck will be provided to you, but this is some good things when you're talking to your board, for instance. You have to say, look, I don't want to walk away from people who might potentially be interested in us in our community. Maybe you're in Florida and you know a Publix executive. Cool. But why should they care about you versus all the other things that they care about? So you can have a bit of a chart here and say, okay, this is how I'm going to prioritize my work. I have somebody who's high affinity and high affluence, ding, ding, ding. But you don't want to even walk away from people who are low affinity, low affluence. Maybe you don't know. The reality is that every story that you read about the little old lady giving a big check, $1 million check to the animal shelter, she's probably been giving $500 for years. And then the bequests came in. Love a good graph. So how can you do this? So first, create affinity first. You can establish an engagement plan. So something like a facility tours, or maybe it's a welcome series of emails, right? And this gets to the core questions. How do I save time? Automate that stuff. Automate those types of things. You could chart it out too. You could build it in an Excel spreadsheet if you're using that. You can use it as some custom fields in your database. Maybe they calculate, or as mentioned, something might have it already out of the box for you. And then you build segmentations about this type of stuff. But you have to measure your expectations. If you think you're going to take anything other than maybe some tactical elements on not saying it's the last day of the year, please God give, like, don't do that. But realistically, everything we're talking about here is gonna see the impact in a few months. But gosh, is it gonna be beautiful. And so make sure you write down your processes. I'm going to be giving you that support, that's SOP, in the follow-up here. It'll be in the, you'll just click the email and I'll put it into the resources. Try to do that today, no later than tomorrow. So number 2, we got about 15 minutes left. So I would say, this is actually how we can do this. So Alana's question, how do you go about building that for Affinity? Well, you focus on the fact that donations are not transactions. And what I mean by that is philanthropically, from a psychology standpoint, I react differently. Think about when you give versus when you even purchase something online from Amazon. When is the moment of happiness? With people who give, the moment of happiness is when they give the gift. They're not waiting for the receipt to come in the mail and then they feel the joy. With Amazon, it's like, I can't wait for all this stuff to come in the mail. So, what you can do is when you're building out an email series, think about the emotional high points and the emotional elements that you want people to feel in a non manipulative way. Remember, competent, autonomous, community. Competent, autonomous community. That drives everything. It is in our DNA. That's how we think about giving. So when we used our recurring giving report to analyze over 13,000 notes from people on why they gave, this is what we found. Emotional sentiments. It wasn't people talking about, I'm happy that I gave an effective gift. It was gratitude for the work. It was love for the people who work there. It was an honor and memorial gift. Generosity, experience, design. Thinking about this holistically in a tactical way. How many of you check if somebody wrote in the donor note, I'm doing this as an honor and memorial gift, even if they didn't check the box? And then you go ahead and reconcile that. Right? You got to keep this stuff into account. We actually found that only 1.2% of recurring donors are actually clicking that box, but a bunch of people are putting it in the notes. So what we're also finding is those identity-based elements. So people who are giving to LGBTQ nonprofits or faith-based organizations, right? Like I grew up Catholic. It's like, right? Like that type of thing. It resonates for people. And it's so hard to understand the history and why, but the more that you collect this information, such as leaving a note during the donation process, invite them to leave this type of note. Don't make them answer a drop down. And you can also send a donor survey. How many of you are sending donor surveys? Love to see that in the chat. So ultimately, use language. You, right? That helps. That's a starting point. But go deeper. Why are they there? Why are they opening your email? Reinforce that connection between you and the work. So final thing. Got about 13 minutes left. Still following questions. We're doing great. How can we focus on building community? Again, I'm going to keep saying this. Trust, trust, trust. Bells and whistles are great. Neon just rolled out DAF Pay. It's awesome. Okay, I'm growing a little bit. It is my last webinar of the year. I use the system actively. I think it's awesome that we've actually figured out how to automate the DAF process. Don't have any DAF donors? Never have heard about that? Don't know what that actually means? Don't listen to me. Right? Focus on what's going to build trust with your technology. Focus on that core element of the copy is right, the images are right. Get those fundamentals down and connect the dots between individuals. How many of you are actually using the relationship tracking features in your database? Household configuration, connections between individuals who know each other, workplace management. Are you using these features? And word of mouth isn't just for businesses. Can you empower your most passionate supporters to talk about you? Those kind of board parties, right? Like those board dinners, that type of stuff. Data accuracy is key. We've already heard about that. It's costing you $100 per inaccurate record. So why focus on retention in particular? We already talked about hopefully it's going to get back up to 2%, probably will, with end of the year giving. Focus on retention. These are some key final things I want to recommend to you. Please focus on retention. It costs 20 cents to retain those folks. Especially if you get your workplace efficiency to go, I'm accountable for this. Like if you like the guide, I'm really excited for you to see the guide because I even built in a RACI model responsible, accountable, right? That type of stuff. If people know what they're supposed to do, it makes the work overall easier. I've worked in so many small shops where we're tripping over ourselves. Just get on the same page about stuff. And that's where then you can go, who's in charge of retention? Every single one of you. It's a key performance indicator. You should be owning that across the organization. Your board should be obsessed with your retention rate. How do you calculate it? If your CRM doesn't have this built in, you can do it very simply like this. There's a lot of great tools out there that can help you calculate this. Fundraising Effectiveness Project has even a very deep fundraising fitness test. So tracking individual donor behavior, you want to look at frequency of giving, the level of appreciation that they are receiving. There is a direct correlation to stewardship and retention, especially according to research by Dr. Adrian Sargent. There's the involvement. There's going to be increasing importance of connections, different movements of generosity between different giving behaviors, meaning are they volunteering and then donating? Are they signing up for peer-to-peer? And are you receiving that feedback? Using data to improve retention, especially accurate data, is key. You can use it to identify at-risk donors. So one of the things that you actually want is it's okay if your average gift goes down, because here's a red flag. Your retention rate drops, but your average gift goes up, dollars up, donors down. That's not good. If anything, we want the average gift size in the sector to drop significantly. That's a good thing, because it means you have more people supporting you and you have a much larger pool of folks that you can cultivate into that community and then focus in on specific programs. Recurring giving, a fantastic vehicle. I think every nonprofit should consider a recurring giving program. You should also give yourself the grace and space for experiments. Not only because it's fun, but because it can inform deeply. So the way that you can think about this, and this goes back to one of the first questions that we had, is where does all this stuff fit? And all of these things are things that you have to think about regardless of your technology stack. That is a fancy way of just saying all the stuff that you have. You have things that engage people, the timeline of gifts, whether they're a prospective giver, the relationships and communications. And then you have the automation elements. So you should deeply feel comfortable owning the people side. The technology needs to conform to how you want to talk about and think about people from an affinity standpoint, an affluence standpoint. But the technology can help automate a lot of these things, such as a workflow automation, such as bulk editing records, such as appending wealth data. So I've added a little bit of check boxes. Yes, there is the advanced tools of things like artificial intelligence. Kind of happy I haven't seen any questions about that, but I'm happy to answer it. If you haven't checked out fundraising.ai, that's the way to think about AI. Don't hold back. So here's a sample process that you can run, and we're coming up to time. I'm almost actually at the end of the presentation side. So you can look at an all supporter segment list. Say, give me everybody who's given. I'm going to focus in on people given $501 to $5,000. Okay, within that, let me look at people who have a high affinity. And then maybe you can look at and say, ooh, I've appended some wealth data, or I've gotten some intelligence from one of my board members that, there's something interesting here, and that they're interested in the work that we do, but they need to learn more. Okay, what can we do here? And in my opinion, where AI needs to go is not write crappy emails for people, but to actually pull out all of this information and put a plan together for you and suggest that. Maybe we'll get there. I don't run the product, but I make suggestions. And so you can look at these types of things and update and even say, okay, I'm going to update all these people en masse because I had my phone call list. I set aside 2 hours to make phone calls for the day. How many of you have internalized as a key performance indicator growth and giving rate? Put it in the chat. If not, and I'll show you what that is, but generally it's money up, money down, en masse. It is not profit and loss statements. It is taking into account losses or improvements in retention rate. Remember, you can have the average gift go up, and even you can see, oh, the money still came in. That's because maybe you went to one donor and said, we have a funding shortfall. I need you to fill the gap. That's not sustainable. You might hit your profit and loss numbers for finance. The expenses may not have, increased over the profit, but that's not sustainable. And so growth in giving rate is good. Thank you, Wendy. Oh, Wendy, I'm not surprised. That's awesome. Growth in giving is that. So here's a bit. Again, you're going to get the deck. This should also be calculated in your databases. If not, Fundraising Effectiveness Project also has some awesome resources here. Okay. 5 minutes. Yeah. You got to get the board bought in. That's the thing. And the ED. It's got to be a team effort. This goes back to Caitlin's question. Okay, so what's next? I wanna actually do a fun thing while we're sitting here. First, save the date. I'm gonna put that up. I'm gonna keep following some questions, but I got a fun little game that we're gonna do before we wrap here for today. First, if you know our virtual conference, Generosity Exchange is gonna be. Oh gosh, did I get the dates right? I might have put the wrong dates. Let me confirm this. I'm such a goofball. This is like my thing too. Nope, it's right. Okay, 15th and 16th. It's been a long year. If you are interested in learning more, even if you're a current Neon user, there's some awesome stuff. We're doing websites. We have peer-to-peer. Oops, we'll get to that. And we're also evolving our community education. So before we wrap for today and I make sure all our questions are answered, I'd love to hear from you. What should we focus on next? You might get this as an automated pop-up afterwards, but I wanted to pop it into here as a quick survey. We've talked about a lot of different things. What haven't we gotten into? What can we address in our work? What can we help educate going into next year? Would love to see that. I'm going to flash that on here. Don't leave yet, though. I want to take everybody who registered for today, and we're going to do a little game. Oh, I think I got rid of the chat. I want to make sure that that is there. Okay. I took everybody who registered today. A better survey module. Oh, Judy, we're working on it. I know. It's a good one. I'm going to spin this wheel of names. This is from everybody who registered for here. And so I'm going to give away a special gift. The person may not be here live, so we're going to follow up. But spin a little of this wheel. Yeah, good. Maria! Is Maria Dismody live? I'm going to take a screenshot of this. Okay. Yay, Maria! I'm going to go ahead and flash back to the survey. Very simple survey here. I really, really want to thank everybody for being part of things, being part of the Neon One ecosystem, even if you're just checking us out for the first time. I'm really, really appreciative that you did that. This is kind of the vibe that we have here. We have some really awesome research that we're going to be working on next year. We're obviously getting ready for a big event that we want to do to help support you in generosity experience design. Generosity is everywhere. And I am so grateful for every single one of you. Let me get off camera so you can see my goofy big face. Every single one of you are here because you care about getting better at your work. And I know that it's hard. I've lived it. I remember waking up in cold sweats, I was wondering how I was going to pay my rent, right? And that sucks. And the reality is that it's not enough to just want to do good. You have to be good at doing good. And focusing on the basics around people, not money, that's a great start. Because there's too many fundraisers that they're taught the wrong message, that it's all about the money, and it's hurting us. And I believe in every single one of you to do that. I'm going to get off my, lectury soapbox, and I want to wish all of you a happy holidays and a kick-ass end of the year. And I cannot wait to see you in 2025. Thank you very much. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and otherwise, I'll see you later.